Welcome back, everyone. My name is Steven. I'm your True Champion, and as I'm sure you all know, this past weekend was the Digimon Card Game Fest in Arlington, Texas, hosted by Play TCG, where I was lucky enough to be an official commentator. And as you can also see, this isn't the Champion's Cave you're used to seeing my videos in. It's a hotel room here in Dallas, Texas, that I am stuck in because my flight into California got canceled due to tornado warnings. Turns out in areas of the world that aren't California, weather is an actual thing that can affect airplane travel, and that's the situation I find myself in. But my misfortunes aside, this weekend was an absolute blast. I had so much fun meeting you guys in real life, commentating the event, and overall talking with the wonderful players in the Digimon TCG in an IRL capacity. Being a part of one of the biggest IRL tournaments since this game's release was an absolute honor, and despite all these hardships, I wouldn't have changed it for the world. All that aside, I figured why not make some lemonade out of lemons and make a video talking about the top 8 deck lists from this past weekend. There was a lot going on for this first IRL championship in Digimon, and one of those things was the inclusion of mulligans and side decks for the Set 7 format. This was sort of the apex, or the actual testing grounds for this mechanic, and I had a long talk with a lot of the players who were doing really well, as well as just players throughout the entire event, and I want to give some cool insights as to the meta mindset that most players had when approaching this tournament. If you guys are excited for this video or are just hoping that I get home as soon as possible, be sure to let me know by smashing that like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking that bell for notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. Also, I'll probably be going live the second I actually make it back to my house, and if you want to talk with me about your experience in the Digimon Card Game Fest or just about Digimon in general, be sure to follow me over on Twitch. Link is down below, as always. By the way, I think I just realized something really funny about this video. I'm probably editing it while in the airport waiting for my new flight. And if that is the case, future Steven, be sure to let us know. I think that's just hilarious. Anyways, let's talk about some deck lists. Alright, starting us off, we have in the top 8, in no actual order because I don't remember what the actual placements were for this event, we have Ryan, who was playing Blue Hybrid. You're going to see a theme throughout this entire event, given that Blue Hybrid actually won, but there's a new wave of Blue Hybrid that's going around that basically just sacrifices the Magna Garurumon package in favor for a more consistent lineup of memory blockers, reduced Digivolution cost blockers, and of course, a Zulongmon as the new ideal finisher in the deck. And taking a look here more closely at Ryan's deck, I'm not really seeing a divergence from that mentality. We do see some pretty cool tech cards like BT4 Beowulfmon, probably for green decks, or just as an extra attacker that could eventually become an Azulongmon. Speaking of extra attackers, we're also seeing a copy of Octomon from BT6, some, OG Gabubon strats sort of sneaking in there, as well as that BT4 Kendo Garurumon to hopefully deal with some of these newer, higher counted floodgates that are in Digimon decks. And sadly, in the image that I have available here, which I don't think you guys can find anywhere else, so this is some pretty private info, there is no side deck, but don't worry, there's going to be plenty of examples for Blue Hybrid side decks once we get through the rest of this video. Overall, though, I think this is a really good example of sort of the, balanced 50 cards that we can expect to see from more modern Blue Hybrid archetypes in the Set 7 format. Continuing in the top 8, we have one of my favorite decks in BT7, and of course one of my favorite performances from this past weekend. We have Thien Nguyen bringing X Antibody. You all know, if you've watched any of my live streams or heard me talk at all about BT7, I'm in love with this deck, and I'm super happy to see it doing so well in this tournament. If you guys have never seen this deck before, the basic idea is it's Black OTK, or Black Jesmon. You have the Dorogoromon from Set 7, who basically acts as your finisher, your advantage engine, and just your removal source of the deck. He really does everything you need him to. He can build his source with X Antibody Digimon like Dorogreymon, or even have cards like Sunriseamon underneath his sources to have him gain plus security. You can combo this with really powerful cards like Zubagon Punch, and the damage can just add up. When you combine with that the potential of memory boosts plus Chaosmon, as well as Grumblemon's OTKs are really easy to come by. From there, we also have some inclusions of cool, neat cards like Alphamon and Metal Greymon, who in combination with cards like Zubagon Punch can still enable you to have a really high amount of security damage against your opponent that doesn't solely rely on Dorogoromon. I would say some of the decks this deck does well against are the slower setup decks like Cherubimon, Lilithmon, maybe even to an extent red/blue or yellow hybrid, because they can just give up too much memory in the early game, and you can combo that really well with your memory boosts and your Dorogreymon plus security inheritables to get damage out of nowhere. And really quickly, before we move on to the next deck, we do have a side deck here to talk about that includes 4 Parabolic Junk, 2 Omnimon Zwart Defeat, and 4 copies of Neo Devimon. Obviously, those Zwart Defeats and Neo Devimon are the tamer hate this deck wants to have in this hybrid-focused format, but the Parabolic Junks are interesting. I would say this is a really nice way to play around removal. You can basically Parabolic Junk one of your Digimon that you're trying to set up for a play on the following turn, so that way if your opponent does get rid of it with something like a Wyvern's Breath, or maybe even some kind of Shine Greymon effect, you gain more memory to hopefully build back up on the following turn. This way you don't need to be afraid of like promoting up your Dorogreymons early if they don't have their actual on Digivolve effect applied, or so you can just set up multiple ways to gain memory during your turn by targeting a rookie like Chumon, swinging into security, having him die, and then gaining 2 out of nowhere. Suddenly you can now climb up into a Mega that you weren't able to before. So it could be a way for you to actually extend your turn while also being more aggressive. Super awesome deck, and huge shout out to Thien for taking it all the way to top 8 in this really competitive tournament. If you're a fan of black and you want to play it in set 7, this is a great place to start. Moving on to our next deck, we have Joey Robinson, who is also top 8 with blue hybrid, but a different kind of blue hybrid, still the same like new school type of less Magnas, more Zulongmons as your main finisher, but we're seeing some neat tech cards like Susanomon, the 2-drop Matashita from the starter deck blue, and even Absolute Blast. Overall, I think the additions of Susanomon and Absolute Blast are to serve as extra removal spells against certain decks, and maybe even be a way to get more damage against the stallier matchups like Yellow Hybrid. A cool thing too I want to point out is we're not playing any copies of BT7 Bokomon, who is probably like the go-to card to throw in for most hybrid strategies, but if you're used to playing against the blue hybrid matchup, you would know that the second you drop a Bokomon, you basically just always proc your opponent's Sorajos and even their 2-drop Matashitas, and you're just giving up memory every single turn by playing that Bokomon. Here, Joey is like, you know what, why would I play a Bokomon to gain memory when I can just play more blue Digimon like Strabimon from BT6 that can also gain memory. Overall, super cool deck from Joey. Let's take a look at the side deck. We are seeing 2 Koji and 2 Magna Garurumon sort of as like an aggressive package you can throw in for games 2 and 3 that might help you out against decks like Lilith, Green Hybrid, basically things you want to have good removal against, but also be more aggressive against. We're seeing 2 copies of Hexablaumon in there as a nice way to sort of circumvent damage in the late game thanks to all your source removal. And then we're seeing some more just one-ofs like Forbidden Trident, Absolute Blast, Sayakomon, and even the BT7 Strabimon. That probably goes in when you throw in the Kojis and the Magnas for either more hybrid targets as well as the ability to accelerate Kojis into play. Once again, congratulations to Joey for making top 8 with this really nice take on blue hybrid. Rounding off the top 8 decks before we move on to the top 4, we have David Rollins playing yellow purple hybrid. I believe he was the only yellow purple to actually make it into top 8. I think like 2 or 3 made it into top 16. One of them I think was yellow Cherubi, but this is Shine Greymon, you know, Susanomon shenanigans that we've seen pretty much since the beginning of set 7. While on the subject, we are seeing, I think, 3 copies of Shine Greymon in this deck. A lot of people who are playing yellow-purple have actually chosen to remove Shine Greymon from their deck and take a more recovery-focused sort of line when it comes to using the deck, because oftentimes just the value you get from removing bodies isn't really that important in a hybrid-focused meta, and against the more aggro decks like Red Hybrid or even Green Hybrid, that extra recovery can mean a lot. Now, obviously, we do have cards like Jet Sylphie, Dynasmon, and Kazuchi, which can make our deck more resilient, and as you can see in the side deck, we have cards like Seraphimon and Dynasmon that can also supplement that more recovery-based strategy when we need it. And as a yellow player, I do think removing all of your big target removal is threatening against other level 6 focused strategies like Lilithmon, or even Red Hybrid to an extent with Ancient Greymon or Emperor Greymon. So I do like the decision to keep Shine Greymon in main and just take him out when he's not doing well in games 2 and 3. Other than that, I'm not really seeing much else that's not just standard. We are seeing a lower count of purple Kari Kamiya than I think we're used to seeing in Yellow Hybrid. I might even consider going as far as just taking that out and playing the 2-drop TK from the starter deck, so that way you can just max out on the potential yellow tamers you have in your deck. But thanks to your purple eggs and Gazimon, you still have plenty of targets for Shivar's Their Sates, the most powerful removal spell currently in the game. And then looking at the side deck here, we have 2 Cutemon, 2 Mechanorimon, 2 Seraphimon from BT1, Dynasmon, and 3 copies of Fly Bullet. Again, I think whenever you're facing up against a deck that really loves having level 6s in play, like other mirror match type situations, or even against things like Lilithmon, having access to this Fly Bullet can be really, really handy. Also, it's a nice just rogue pick too if you were to match up against X Antibody, which was being talked about before the event. It is nice to see some yellow-purple hybrid representation. I know a lot of people have been feigning or losing confidence in how strong this deck could be given the new surge of blue hybrid. I promise you this deck is still gas, it's still strong, and it should be considered as one of the best decks in the format. Alrighty, here we are. We are moving to the top 4, beginning first with Ying Huang and his Lilithmon deck list. I'm so used to calling this deck Lilithmon Loop from BT6, but as I'm sure you all are well aware, with the lack of Mega Digimon Fusion, you can't really loop anymore using this strategy, but you can still gain a ton of advantage. And that's just evident by how Ying has chosen to build this deck. As you can see in the upper left-hand corner there, we only have 8 rookies in this deck. I think Ying was relying on just the mulligan that was applied for this tournament, as well as the maximum consistency of 4 copies of Analog Youth and 4 copies of Eismon's Scatter Mode as his ideal turn 1 plays. This is actually a really cool message for anyone out there. Instead of thinking of your turn 1 plays as just rookie cards in your deck, really think about all the cards you would like to see in your opening hands. I think any combination of Rookie, Eismon, Scatter Mode, and Analog Youth are all awesome options, and when you look at that, that means you have 16 going first cards in this deck instead of just 8, and once you think of it that way, it really does paint a picture for how consistent this kind of deck list could be. Moving on to the champions, we see 2 Kinkakumon, 1 Ginkakumon, 1 Promote, and 4 Eismon alongside the Eismon Scatter Mode I mentioned earlier. This is pretty standard, I think. You want to have the Promote package in there as a really good target for your Mastamon or even your Zwarts to call from the trash to either gain an extra attacker or, of course, gain some more resources. And, of course, we have the patented Eismon combo that is being abused by purple decks all over in the Set 7 format. It's really aggressive, it can gain a lot of advantage, and overall, it just sets up perfectly for a deck like this that loves having a lot of cards in the trash. From there, we have Ultimates in 4 copies of Cerberusmon Werewolf Mode, 3 copies of regular Cerberusmon, and 1 copy of Lady Devimon to probably help us against, again, those higher number of floodgates that are rolling around in Digimon decks. Also, the Eismon package just naturally combos really well, with the Cerberusmon package being able to evolve really quickly into Ultimates, can lead to you being able to get Rush 9000 DP level 5 Digimon in play as soon as possible, and just start attacking with them. I've seen Ying time and time again just bum rush yellow hybrid players with these Cerberusmons, and they never die to security, and they just attack again on the next turn, or they force your opponent to respond to them in some way. It's always hilarious, and it's always really strong. And then finally we have the Megas, 3 Lilithmon, 2 Nidhogg, and 1 Mastay. Funny enough, even though this is a Lilithmon deck, if you guys watched any of Ying's stream games against Louise the Panda, he never once went into Lilithmon. He was basically playing Nidhoggmon and Mastamon Beatdown, and it was hilarious and also really nice to see that kind of level of play, because even though you draw maybe unoptimally, maybe Lilithmon isn't always available, there are tons of options in purple, and given how aggressive this deck can play, there are tons of avenues for victory that don't just solely rely on the outright advantage you can gain from Lilithmon. And then finally rounding out the whole deck, we have 4 Analog Youth, 2 Omnimon Zwart, 4 Jack Ray, the bread and butter of Lilithmon, 1 Calling from the Darkness, really useful card, 1 copy of Dead or Alive. Funny enough, if this is ever checked in your security while you have a Cerberusmon regular in play, you can bring the Werewolfmon out and then just gain 9 memory during your opponent's turn. It's a hilarious way to win. 3 Depth Claw, super awesome. Whenever your Eismon has jamming and doesn't actually die to your opponent's security, you can just Death Claw it, kill something, and then still get all the value of your Graceful Charity type effect. And then finally, 1 copy of Win Rate 60% as your way to probably evolve into Omnimon Zwart for 2 cost, or even go into Lilithmon/Mastemon for free. Moving on, we have Ying's side deck here featuring Magna Kidmon. This probably has a couple of functions. It's of course a really good card against BL Starmon or 3 Musketeers, but I think the main thing Ying would use this for is against the longer matchups. He would use it as a way to not deck himself out at the end of his turn, because a common problem that Lilithmon is having in this current format is there's no way to loop. You know, there's no way to get your resources back once you run out of cards in deck. Magna Kidmon is really your only and best option. We also have 2 copies of Rebelli and 2 copies of Neodevimon. Thanks to the Eismon engine, purple is essentially an ultimate toolbox type deck, and having these cards against the OTK type decks or against the hybrid decks is always nice. Speaking of level 5 toolbox, we also have 3 copies of Lucamon Chaos Mode featuring 1 copy of Dead or Alive. I imagine these would come in as again, for the slower matchups, being a nice way just to get a 8 cost or 6 cost using Lilithmon way to kill a Tamer / kill a level 6 Digimon while gaining a 12,000 DP body on a level 5 Digimon that could become another Lilithmon if you wanted it to. And finally, we have 1 copy of Emergency Program Shutdown. This is just for the mirror match. I think Ying told me a funny story about how he did his favorite play of like go into Mastemon, go to 0, have a Lilithmon in play, and then just go 1 cost Program Shutdown against the mirror. Good luck. You have 1 memory and you can't use any option cards. That's pretty cool. Congratulations once again to Ying for getting 4th place with Lilithmon. Even though this is a repeat of what happened at Nationals, it's always a pleasure and a masterclass in purple watching him play. Alright, even though I'm a huge fan of X Antibody, we have coming in at 3rd place, Louise the Panda, and my favorite deck from the top 8 at the Digimon Card Game Fest, Blue Magna Garurumon. I'm not even going to call this deck Blue Hybrid because that would not be fair to what Lewis actually does with this deck. Really quickly, before we talk about anything, I want to mention 2 things that are super important about this deck. Number 1, there are no Tommy Hemis in this deck. The only source of freezing or attacking / blocking stunning that Lewis has access to are these 2 copies of Korikakumon that have to go on Hybrid Digimon. And the second thing I want to point out is the 4 copies of Magna Garurumon and 4 copies of Koji Miyamoto. Louise the Panda is a friend of the channel, and he used, I believe, a pretty much card-for-card deck list like this one to become a champion in the Digimon Showdown, and he used it again here to get 3rd place at the Digimon Card Game Fest. It's a really aggressive, I think, adaptation of Blue Hybrid that focuses on having a ton of hybrids always in hand to help you combo with Magna Garurumon to get either removal or extra aggression against your opponent. And this deck is pretty straightforward. It's just trying to draw as many hybrids as possible and set up Magna Garurumon as fast as possible to either gain extra aggression or control your opponent's board. And even though this deck is really straightforward, we do see some pretty cool techs in here like Sealamon as a nice way to protect yourself against the more aggressive decks, and even that Omnimon Blitz, which could be that out-of-nowhere last attack you need to win the game. And fun fact, Lewis did use this card to actually earn his 3rd place finish, and it was an absolute spectacle to watch on stream. Taking a closer look at his side deck here, we're seeing a lot of common themes that we've seen from other Blue Hybrid side decks, but a thing I want to point out here is the 2 copies of EX1 Metal Garurumon. This card, for those that don't know, has an effect that lets you tuck on deletion Digimon from your opponent's board, and it's really good against decks like Cherubimon that either have Cherubimon or Rihimon and need to actually have those cards be deleted to get any value from them. This feels like an absolute hard counter for those decks, and given how hyped that strategy was for this tournament, I'm sure this card served Lewis very well. Congratulations once again to Lewis for this amazing finish, using a version of Blue Hybrid that I think a lot of people have lost faith in. Hopefully, this deck list and this finish can give you some more faith that this actually works and can get wins in the Digimon TCG. Continuing the Blue Hybrid hype train, we have Thomas Nguyen's second place Blue Hybrid deck, a return to this new school of thinking for what makes Blue Hybrid the best deck in the format. And that is 4 copies of each Floodgate, 4 Strabi and 4 Boko for consistency, a massive freezing hybrid package of 4 Kuma, 4 Korikako, and 4 Tamihimi, alongside some really awesome advantage engines like Sorajo, Matashita, and of course, 4 Hammerspark. On top of that, we do see 2 cool tech cards in a Zulongmon and an Absolute Blast, either as a nice finisher or maybe even a nice removal spell against Yellow-Purple Hybrid. Looking over at his side deck, we see 2 copies of Kendo, 1 copy of BT4 Beowulf, 2 copies of Hexablau, 1 Azulong, 1 Metal Garu from EX1 that I just talked about earlier, 1 Susano, 1 Mimi, and 1 Supreme Cannon. I'll talk more about Supreme Cannon in a minute as it's shown in the first place side deck as well, but again we're seeing the inclusion of that Hexablaumon for probably extra defense in the late game against the more aggressive decks of this format. Honestly, Thomas's deck is a really good example of how consistency and playing well can just lead to an amazing finish in tournaments. Congratulations, Thomas, on getting second place. And finally, rounding off the top 8 deck lists, we have the Champion deck list piloted by Jose Salas, and of course, it's Blue Hybrid. I mentioned in my tier list video that Blue Hybrid was the deck to beat. It was the king of the mountain in BT7, and if these top 3 deck lists from this tournament is any example, I think I was right on the nose. And again, we are seeing just a return to that new school of thought for Blue Hybrid, just 4 of each Floodgate, 2 copies of Azulongmon as your main finisher, and then the rest of the deck is just gas. I will say though that in Jose's deck specifically, he is choosing to include cards like Forbidden Trident and Supreme Cannon that can serve as really nice options for dealing with Mirror Match and the amount of Floodgates they have. So if you ever are facing down just like an army of Sayakos or an army of Madokis, you can just go Supreme Cannon, bounce them all back, or even go Forbidden Trident plus Kendo, bounce 2 of them back while also dealing a damage. And I think Jose's decision to include these tech cards in his main deck and not focus just on hard consistency was a really nice example of how you can work with the side deck and not just like allocate all your tech cards over there and then focus your main deck on consistency only. This way, if you expect to fight against the deck the most during a tournament, you can get the most success in game 1, and then if you don't fight against that deck, you can just take these cards out really easily and then add the cards that do help you in the specific matchups, like maybe Yellow-Purple Hybrid, or even like random green decks, where these cards may not be as valuable, but they're still kind of nice. Speaking of Jose's side deck, here we have it right here. Again, pretty straightforward, but like Thomas, he is choosing to include copies of Mimi Tachikawa as well as Hexablaumon. Mimi Tachikawa being a really great inclusion to just sort of stifle any deck in the format that has really powerful option cards, like Yellow-Purple Hybrid. Against blue decks, you can make their Hammersparks gain no memory, which is always funny, and just little things here and there. You'd be surprised how useful this card can be in just random matchups. We're also seeing a copy of Aqua Viper in here, kind of similar to Forbidden Trident or Supreme Cannon. It's a nice way to deal with opposing Floodgates or just pesky level 4s on your opponent's board, but the really cool added benefit of Aqua Viper is against the Mirror Match specifically, you can bounce back any Digimon that's in play that has no sources, and not only are you controlling your opponent's board, but you're potentially shutting off their Matashitas or even Sora and Joes from gaining memory. And then finally, we are seeing a choice of 2 copies of Rattlestar in this side deck. It's just nice to have an option for removal against any deck out there. I would say the most impactful card that this thing can target is a Neo Devimon, for example, in games 2 and 3 against purple decks. Once again, I've said it all video, but huge congratulations to Jose Salas on becoming the first American Digimon Card Game Fest champion. I believe he was the only player to go undefeated in Day 1 as well as Day 2, which is what earned him this first place finish. And boom, there you guys go. That wraps up this video talking about the top 8 from the Digimon Card Game Fest here in Arlington, Texas. I want to say one last time, huge thank you to everyone that came by to say hi and interacted with me while at this event. It made coming back to IRL tournaments that much more special. Also, of course, huge shout out to all my co-commentators, Huang Zero and Ryan the Neighbor, as well as Play TCG for hosting the overall event. It was an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we can do it again in the future. If you guys did enjoy this video and got any value out of what I had to say, be sure to let me know by smashing that like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking that bell with notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitch if you ever want to talk with me live or have me elaborate on anything that I said in this video. Link is down below, as always. With that being said, I've been your true champion, Steven. Please be sure to work hard, rest easy, and live well. And hopefully, I'll see y'all next time. Peace.